Tell me if you've had this experience. Normally, you're calm, you're cool, collected, you can roll with the punches, deal with the stressors that are coming your way. But all of a sudden, you hit maybe 40 years old plus, and your filter is gone. Where you normally would be able to, move through a hiccup with a little more poise, now you find yourself chewing out somebody in the checkout line. This is what happened to a friend of mine. She had reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think my hormones might be a problem. My husband has said I'm a lot more irritable, and I found myself chewing out a TSA worker at the airport when we were in the security line." Now, I don't know about you, but I can find the security check at the airport a stressful situation. So we've got to give her that. But as she said, this was uncharacteristic of her, right? Normally she was able to navigate an experience like that. But all of a sudden she found herself less able to control that irritability, that, tendency to lash out. And so today, I want to talk through if that's you, if you've been there, if you're in midlife, you think you're probably in that perimenopause stage. Let's talk about what could be going on with you hormonally and why you maybe can let go of any shame and blame of yourself that you're carrying if you're experiencing some of the perimenopause rage that can be oh so common. This is Her Genetic Edge with Lori Aikman, a podcast helping women make sense of hormones, genetics, and the midlife transition through practical conversations around health. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to replace medical advice. Please consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your care. First things first, let's just let go of that shame and blame if you are experiencing some of that perimenopause rage. Now, I'm guessing if you're listening to this episode that you've experienced that yourself. No judgment here. Let's talk about what's going on in your body that's contributing to those emotions, and so you can understand and get the help you need to start feeling more like yourself. So let's talk about what's going on hormonally. Overall, if you are in midlife, you're in perimenopause or nearing menopause, what overall is happening is that you're having a decrease in estrogen and progesterone. And for most women, progesterone starts dropping before estrogen. So what can happen? I always like to bring my hands up and give this example to the ladies I work with is when things are normal, ideally you have a nice balance of estrogen and progesterone. But then for many women, they can start to experience that drop in progesterone in perimenopause, which means estrogen is a lot more dominant and we can start to experience some of those irritability symptoms. Now, progesterone stimulates something called GABA in our body. It's a calming neurotransmitter. When we lose that progesterone, it's like we're losing some of the calming benefits that we have from progesterone. Not only is it irritability, but progesterone helps to balance out estrogen in other ways. When we have that loss of progesterone, we can start to experience heavier periods, heavier bleeding, maybe prolonged periods. We can have worsening sleep, worsening irritability, as we talked about. But some women experience things like palpitations, even breast tenderness can get worse because of that imbalance between estrogen and progesterone. And so this is a true hormonal imbalance that's going on, not just PMS, aging, all the labels that we might get in this season. Now, there are some ways that you can actually see what's going on. You can look at symptoms, monitor things like your basal body temperature, your cervical mucus production. Using an app on your phone can help you tell if you're ovulating or not. But you can also do some hormone testing to find out, if you have an imbalance of that estrogen and progesterone. There's a couple different ways to do that. I'm not going to dive into all of those on this episode, but what I want to invite you to do is to download my midlife hormone roadmap. So this is a free download when you get when you become a free subscriber on Substack to Her Genetic Edge. It is free to subscribe. You're just going to get a weekly notification when the podcasts are available. But we're also going to let you know about some upcoming trainings that we have and opportunities to get more support as a woman in midlife. So what you can do is go to laurieaikman.com. When you put your email address in, you'll get an immediate response, which will include that midlife hormone roadmap guide. And it's going to talk you through all the specifics of testing your hormones in perimenopause. Okay, so let's assume you found out you have this hormone imbalance. You're in perimenopause, progesterone is dropping. Here's where things can get worse. And it can get worse in perimenopause, but I see this happening in women even in their 20s. Here's something you've got to know is, again, back to my hands. If we have that drop in progesterone, we have that imbalance. But what else can happen is your body has to make estrogen, use estrogen, and then it's got to clear estrogen. It gets metabolized or detoxified. It happens in the liver and then actually goes out through your poop. If your body's ability to detox is limited, if you don't have all the resources that you need to detox estrogen out, what can happen is you get a buildup of estrogen. So think about this. This can happen again if you were in your 20s. So your hormones should ideally be balanced and you get that buildup of estrogen, you're going to have that hormone imbalance, right? Where you have more estrogen and not enough progesterone to help balance it out. Well, think about what happens then in perimenopause. So your progesterone is declining and you don't clear your estrogen well, your estrogen backs up. So you have this much greater discrepancy between estrogen and progesterone. And that's where I see women just maybe have much more severe symptoms compared to other women that are in perimenopause. So I'm actually an example of a woman like this. Now, I will say right now, my hormones are pretty balanced at this time, but all of my life, like since I was a teen, I've always had pretty heavy periods, except when I was on birth control. When I was cycling normally, I've had my periods always lasted, 7 days or so. Bleeding was very heavy when you look at what's actually normal. Using a tampon and a pad, you guys know how it is, but just very heavy cycles that would lead you to think I must have a lot more estrogen and not enough progesterone. Well, doing what I do, I've tested my hormones and I actually have hormone testing from years ago that I looked back on. And I've actually always made pretty good progesterone. And my estrogen, when you looked at levels, it's actually not that high. It's never been really, really high. I have seen that happen in women, especially when they're on HRT and they don't clear their estrogen well, they can get pretty high levels of estrogen. Well, that was actually never the case for me. What showed me what was really going on was when I did genetic testing, when I was able to see what my body did with that estrogen. And I have specific genetic variants that make it harder for my body to clear estrogen. One of those in particular is the COMT gene, or COMT. So it finally made that kind of high estrogen symptom picture make sense, even though I really haven't had a huge imbalance in hormones. Another example that comes to mind is a woman I worked with a few years ago in her mid 40s. She had a long-standing history of very heavy periods. She had actually had uterine fibroids, which she had to have a DNC for. And then she was placed on a progestin-only pill just to keep the hormones down and to keep from the fibroids from proliferating. And so she had actually come to us, not for the hormones, just really more just to check up on nutrient levels, making sure everything looked healthy overall. When we looked at her labs, her hormones were of course low. When you're on an oral contraceptive, when you're on birth control, your ovaries are not going to produce estrogen and progesterone. So when you check your labs, they're going to be really low. So if you ever check hormones, I've seen women do this, get a Dutch test, which is very expensive, on birth control pills. And all it tells you is they're really low hormone levels. So note there. But what we did see, she had very low hormone levels on the blood test. But we did see that she had a few other markers that told us that she was probably deficient in things like folic acid or folate, and vitamin B B12 and vitamin B6. And the other marker that was showing up was homocysteine. She had an elevated homocysteine. And essentially, what that means is there's signs that her body is having a hard time methylating. And methylation is a process in the body that it affects a lot of things, turns on and off genes. It affects our neurotransmitter clearance. It also can affect the detoxification or clearance of estrogen. So there were a couple signs on her labs that she could have trouble clearing estrogen. And then when I looked at her history of heavy bleeding, heavy periods, fibroids, she also told me that her mother had had the same thing and had had a hysterectomy. So when I looked at that, I'm thinking to myself, ding, 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 she's probably got some genetic variants that are keeping her body from processing estrogen in an optimal manner, so that estrogen is building up, creating that high estrogen picture. When estrogen goes up in the first part of the cycle, its job is actually to thicken the uterus, to get it ready for implantation, if we were to become pregnant. Progesterone helps to balance out that estrogen and to keep the uterus from thickening too much. So when somebody is developing things like fibroids, there's other things that play a role, but there's likely some imbalance of estrogen and progesterone where that uterus is really thickening to the point that it's developing fibroids. So just off symptoms, I could tell that was likely a problem for her. Let's recap what we covered in this episode. So one, we talked about that imbalance that happens in perimenopause where progesterone drops and estrogen becomes more dominant. Then we talked about how that can be exacerbated if you don't clear your estrogen well. Again, that discrepancy or that imbalance between estrogen and progesterone gets wider when we don't clear our estrogen well and our progesterone is dropping. And so an optimal strategy for addressing that could, yes, be replacing progesterone, but definitely needs to be focused on clearing out that estrogen. Again, I just want to reiterate for you, if you have felt shame, blame, guilt, just feeling stuck in midlife, feeling like this is a new normal that you have to get used to, I just want to tell you that there's more possible for you. It is possible to figure out how to get your hormones in check in midlife and feel like yourself again. If you're like, I think this might be me, and my problem is not just that I'm getting older or the blanket statement of perimenopause, I want to help you figure out what might be going on in your body. And so we have launched something called the Insider Community. We created to help women understand what's going on in their body, especially in midlife. The great thing is there's so much information going on out there. There's so much talk about perimenopause and menopause, but I think women can feel overwhelmed by all the information, not know what applies to them, and not have any idea where to start. So the Insider Community we created as a response to this, as a place to help you get the information, correct information, understand what applies to you and what does not, and help you know what your next step is moving forward. And that membership is $99 for a year. One of the first events that we have in the Insider Community is coming up on Friday, July 31st. We're actually going to be talking through hormone detoxification, clearing those bottlenecks. How do you know what's going on in your body, and what can you actually do to help bring your hormones back in balance, back in check, so you can feel like yourself again? We're going to be having masterclasses and workshops like this every month on different topics like gut health, weight loss, thyroid health. I'm really excited to bring this community to you, and I want to invite you to join. We are launching our founding member rate for the Insider Community. And as a bonus for our founding members, for the first 40 women that join at that $99 rate, we're actually giving you a one-on-one strategic start session where you're going to sit down with me or a member of my team for 20 minutes. We're going to talk through what's going on in your body, what symptoms that you're having, and help you know what your next best step is to really move the needle and start feeling like yourself again. And when you join the insider community, there's actually a whole series on hormone balance in midlife that you can start binge watching as soon as you join. Make sure you don't miss that. You don't have to keep navigating midlife alone. You don't have to keep piecing together strategy from podcast episodes, books, blogs online, right? Join the insider community so that we can help you know what the next best step is for you. All right. I hope you loved this episode. Share it with a friend who needs to hear it, and I will see you next week.